Hey, how's it going, AP students? Here we are to look at our next vocab test. And this is going to be a big one because there's going to be 40 words on this one. So we're going to start right away with the vocab words that have to do with the first of the revolutions we'll be talking about. That would be the American Revolution. So, before we start, know there's going to be 40 new words on this one. And there will only be 2 vocab tests left this year. So if anyone has missing standards, you have 2 chances to make up those missing standards. And also these words have a way of showing up on the multiple choice part, and you can also use them on the essays in your AP exam. So let's start with our first word that we see there, and that would be the Enlightenment. We can define the Enlightenment. Often it's also called the Age of Reason. It is a time when people took a look more at questions and they wanted to apply more of a scientific process to it, or a rational response to it instead of an emotional or a religious one. It was a way of looking at political issues, which are going to be very big. Also looking at social issues, economic issues, and everything that's going on. Most of our Enlightenment thinkers, they're people like Montesquieu. There are people like John Locke. We also have Voltaire. These are people who are really calling into questions acceptance practices. Some accepted practices that they call into question would be like the divine right of kings. Like, should a king rule just because they're the king? Does God actually give them extra power? They start looking for more democratic ideas, more for the common people. So these often got started, conversations, looking more at science. This happened definitely after the Renaissance. What we're looking at here in the Enlightenment is basically a new way of thinking, doing more questioning, trying to apply more science to social issues, political issues, and it leads to a lot of questioning of government, which then leads to our revolutions that happen in this chapter. So you can look at the Enlightenment really as like a big cause for this age of revolutions that will happen during the modern time period in the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the Latin American revolutions. It is the cause or a big influence for these revolutions as people start questioning old practices. Our next word that you see in the screen in front of you would be the Stamp Act. So let's take a closer look at that. So the Stamp Act, which was first passed by the British Parliament in 1756, what it was basically that for the colonists to buy any of their paper goods, like we see in this comic here, whether they were books, deeds, legal documents, newspapers, even playing cards and dice, as the guy says, they would have a stamp that had to be put on them. And every piece of paper that you sold or legal document would have to have this stamp on it. And this stamp cost a tax. The stamp wasn't free, so you had to pay for that stamp. It was a way for the colonies to have a tax. It was a way for the British, I'm sorry about that, to have a tax on their colonies. Now you have to remember when this happened that this was when Britain had colonized North America, and the 13 colonies are still part of Britain. And this is going to lead to a lot of rebellion, where the colonies are like, why are we paying for this? We don't have a representative. There's no one who speaks for us in Parliament. So they get upset about this because they're like, you're going to tax us, but yet we don't even have a voice. We don't have a representative. And it made the colonists upset. And this is one of the things that led to, one of the main events that led to the colonists rebelling against the British, which will lead down the road to the American Revolution. The Stamp Act does eventually get repealed in 1765. The British Parliament repeals it, but then they have some other acts that follow it. And all of these eventually lead to a separation between Britain and what will become the United States of America. The next term that you have for the vocab is taxation without representation. This was the rally cry that's very connected. We just talked about the Stamp Act. It's the rally cry for the colonists in North America, in what will be the United States, as they get very upset by being taxed by the Stamp Act, which happened. There's also the Tea Act, where the British taxed the tea that was given to them. And taxation without representation is what the colonies said was happening. They said we should have some people in the British Parliament. In the British, where people get to speak, they get to vote for their laws, is called the Parliament. They said we should have some people in that British Parliament, and if we can't, we shouldn't be taxed. So we should be able to at least have a vote or a say. So one of the slogans of the American Revolution became no taxation without representation, or basically, don't tax us unless we have some kind of representative. And again, this will be one of the major slogans of the American Revolution, which will lead the colonies to becoming an independent country. Our next two terms are very connected, so I am going to talk about them together. They are the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson. And what you need to know is that, number one, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. So we can see by this picture that's on there, you can see that it was written in July 4th, 1776. And what the Declaration of Independence, what it really does, it declares the 13 colonies, the 13 British colonies that were in North America, that they were declaring their independence and that they were now free and independent from Great Britain. So the document, you'll do a map on some of the words that are in this one, but basically the declaration says, the document states that rights are given to you by God. You just give them. God gave you your rights. And then it states basically that, our natural position is to have our rights of life, liberty, and what Thomas Jefferson said would be the pursuit of happiness. And that basically we make governments to protect us of these rights. That's why we have governments. Government should be made to protect our rights. That sounds good today, but in absolute time, that was not the case. The case was that kings ruled because, gods wanted them to rule. That was divine right of kings. The Declaration of Independence says that we make a government so that we can protect our natural rights. The Declaration also says that basically when any government becomes destructive or starts to take away your rights, as a people, you have the right and the duty to overthrow and get rid of that government and to get a new one that will protect your rights. It then makes a huge list, which most of the document's actually about, a huge list of all the grievances against King George III and everything that he's done wrong and why the 13 colonies should be able to declare their independence from Great Britain. Thomas Jefferson is the person who wrote it. He was influenced by many Enlightenment thinkers. The biggest one that he was influenced by was John Locke. He also will become the third president of the United States. Next is George Washington. There he is. George Washington was a man who was actually in the British military. He actually fought for the British in many wars, like in the French and Indian War, where he fought on the British side. He was in the British military. Eventually, he becomes the general of the colonial army in North America, what will be the United States. He leads the independence, the American Revolution. He is the leader, the general, who fights against the British and is able to win in huge battles like Saratoga and is able to finally defeat the British at the Battle of Yorktown. So George Washington is the general of the what will become American troops, or United States of American troops, and will become the first president of the United States of America. Thomas Paine is a person who becomes very influential in the American Revolution for writing his pamphlet, not really quite a book, it's kind of smaller than a book, called Common Sense. And Common Sense is basically, it is making the argument of why the colonies should be able to have their independence against Britain. It influences a lot of people and leads many more people to support the independence movement in the colonies and to fight against the British, which happens in the American Revolution. A couple of battles for you now that are in the American Revolution. Not that you have to know too many. That's for next year. You just wait. All right, so the Battle of Saratoga, this is known, as it says in that picture, as the turning point in America's fight for independence or in the American Revolution. It has happened in 1777. Up until this point, the colonists didn't really have many big victories. The British were, for the most part, able to overwhelm them with victories in places like New York. But what happens is the colonists are able to turn it around. They're able to win a big battle here, which will eventually lead to the colonists getting their independence. All right, the Battle of Yorktown. The Battle of Yorktown was the battle where the British troops surrendered to George Washington and the American forces. Also, there were many French forces that were helping the United States at this time too, because France gave a lot of money and troops and helped America greatly. So the British surrendered to the American forces under George Washington, and this was the effectively last battle of the war, where after this, because of the Battle of Yorktown, 2 years later at the Treaty of Paris, basically the peace treaty is signed, and this allows the United States of America to become a new nation, and basically the American battle for independence or revolution is won. The United States is now a country. There you go. Constitution. We're referring to here is the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution is a pretty amazing document. It was made with many principles that came from the Enlightenment. For example, we talked about Montesquieu and how he wanted to divide the government up into different branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial. That idea is put into the Constitution, where the government's broken up into different parts. It also gives a Bill of Rights, rights for all the people that they can have. Again, another idea very much of the Enlightenment that comes into the American government. So the Constitution is a working document and it can be changed. The biggest thing, you see the line, we the people, that's a huge Enlightenment idea right there in itself, that the people are running the government, and the idea of the Constitution is that the government's supposed to serve the people, be for the people, not the other way around. One more thing is it's also the oldest working Constitution that's in existence. The United States is not an old country in some ways, but we have a form of government with our Constitution that's been in place longer than any other Constitution. All right, Bill of Rights, I'd kind of mentioned this. Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution. These are written after the American Revolution, and these are basically like 10 rights that you have that the government cannot take away or cannot infringe upon, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion are listed in there. Government can't put any soldiers in your home like Britain was doing. That basically you have to have, a trial. That you have the right to have a trial by jury for certain crimes. Basically, these are the rights that are given to you that the government cannot take away. And it's the first 10 amendments of our Constitution. So there you go. There are our vocab terms for the American Revolution. You are now 1/4 the way done with the vocab terms. There are 30 more of them.